welcome back to my YouTube channel, or I guess I should probably say our YouTube channel, because this is the little guy that everyone really comes here to see. I'm Tanya and this is Zobi, and we thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail together. Yes, he did it too, in 2022. And we live in our RV and travel the country having adventures, hiking and biking and kayaking and scuba diving, and he does all of the above, well, except scuba diving, although honestly he probably would. But anyway, that's not why you're here. You're here because you want to hear the worst advice given in reality that I have actually heard, actually seen, or was even given to me for thru-hiking the Appalachian Trail. So here are my top 5 things that I've heard repeatedly or seen repeatedly online in AT Facebook groups and forums for the worst advice that can possibly be given to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail. All right, you ready? Here we go. Number 1, I see this all the time, and I witnessed people who did it on trail and regretted it. Do not do this. Send your winter gear home after the Smokies. Do not send your winter gear home after the Smokies. And here's why. The caveat to that. Unless you're starting in like May, and hardly anyone starts in May because that gives you like 4 months to do the trail. So I hear this advice given no matter when anyone's start date is. It could be January, February, or most common March or April when most no-bow thru-hikers are starting. And I literally cannot even understand where this advice came from. It doesn't make any sense, because the Smokies are, yes, the highest elevation on the trail until you get back up into New Hampshire, but from Georgia through Southern Virginia, you are at the sustained highest elevation. That's the first 500 miles of the trail. You are sustained at the highest elevation of the entire trail. The towns in Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, as you go back down, are typically right around 1,500 feet elevation. So on trail, you're typically between 3,000 and 6,000 feet elevation, which is higher than everywhere else on the trail. When you get up into New Hampshire, the towns are below 1,000 feet. Actually, even in Maine, the only town in New Hampshire and Maine that's at like 1,500 feet is Rangeley. So you have steep climbs because you're starting below 1,000 feet and going up to 4,000, 5,000, or in the case of Mount Washington, 6,000 feet. But the sustained elevation that you're at for the first 500 miles of the trail, from Georgia all the way through Grayson Highlands, which is after Damascus in Virginia, you are at or over about 3,000 to 6,000 feet. So where this concept of, oh, when you're past, Clingman's Dome, the highest point on the trail in the Smokies, send your winter gear home, you don't need it anymore. The elevation aspect of it doesn't even make any sense. Then there's the aspect of what I know because I lived in the South. This is a very common misconception. Humidity equals cold in wintertime. So I know people think humidity and they think heat and they think that it's warm. I lived in Florida for 20 years and everyone makes fun of Floridians for being wusses because it drops below 70 and we bring out our sweatshirts. I also lived in the Smokies and I lived in North Georgia for 3 years, and I've traveled all over Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, and up into Virginia. So I've been in the South, and look it up. I mean, just Google it. Humidity in wintertime makes air colder. And I could get into all the scientific reasons for that, but I'll let you do your Googling and research if you have that, science nerd brain that wants to really understand all the details of why that is. But basically, think about it this way. Humidity is moisture in the air. What is the number one thing that is your enemy when it's cold outside? Getting wet. Moisture. So while you may not be actually seeing or feeling moisture in the air because it's not actually precipitating on you in the form of rain or snow, if it's 50% humidity, that's a lot of moisture in the air. And that's very common in the South in the wintertime. And you don't even realize it, but your clothes are absorbing that moisture. That's why cotton kills. Your clothes are actually getting wet, and you don't feel the wet, like the dampness from the sweat or the wet from the rain or whatever, but there's dampness that is going on. And that, when you stop hiking and that is evaporating, it's the same thing that's constantly going on. So it's actually feels warmer if you're naked outside in the winter in humidity than if you have clothes on in the winter in humidity. But please don't hike naked in the winter, okay? Just saying, that's actually another like little like random scientific fact about like humidity, being in wet air, and what clothing can do to you. So that's another reason why it is so important to have a pair of dry clothes in your pack to change into at night that are your sleeping clothes and not your hiking clothes. But the bottom line is, my point to all this is, humidity in the South actually makes it feel colder when it may only be 40 degrees outside. That's why there's a feels like temperature and a wind chill factor, because you're at elevation, so you're losing temperature the higher that you get, actual temperature, plus there's a wind chill factor, plus there's a humidity factor giving you a feels like factor. So if you're looking at town average temperatures in, Tennessee in March, and it says that the average temperature is like 35 or 40 or maybe even 50 or something, depending on where you're looking, you have to subtract for elevation. And they say to subtract at least 5 degrees for every 1,000 feet of elevation, and then another 5 degrees for wind chill. So basically subtract 10 degrees for every 1,000 feet of elevation gain from the town you're looking at to where you're going to be hiking, and then factor in the humidity. The feels like factor could be anywhere from 5 to, I've seen as much as 20 degrees lower than what that actual temperature is. So it could be 45 degrees outside and feels like 25 degrees. So yes, you need your winter gear in the South in the wintertime. I highly recommend not sending your winter gear home until you're in central Virginia, which is right around mile like 700 to 800. Maybe get through the Triple Crown, get to Daleville, or maybe get a little past that. I sent mine home around mile 800. For me, with my start date of early March, that was mid-May, and it was just beginning to get warm enough where my winter gear was feeling a little bit too warm while I was hiking and sleeping. So I recommend going more by elevation and where you're at on the trail as opposed to a date on the calendar as well. I will caveat that by saying, if you are starting in May or perhaps like the last week of April, generally in the South, even if you're starting, you're still in Tennessee, North Carolina in mid-May, probably safe to be sending your winter gear home mid to late May, even though you're still at those highest elevations. The highest elevations in the entire eastern United States, east of the Mississippi, are in Tennessee and North Carolina. Mount Washington and the New Hampshire 48 don't even make the top 10 list of the highest mountains east of the Mississippi. They're all in Tennessee and North Carolina. And a lot of those are on or very close to the AT. So you're at elevation. So, all right, I've made my point. Don't send your winter gear home after the Smokies. All right, point number 2, that was 4. Point number 2 is very similar, yet it is different. So I'm making it a separate point. I'm sorry, I laugh at this because I don't know where these come from, especially since I lived in the South. But don't worry about it being cold if you have an April start. What? I've actually gotten into arguments with people online on social media. I've wasted my time hoping other people will read this and see good advice to counteract the bad advice. But there are people who really genuinely believe you don't need winter gear at all if you're starting in April. All right, I'm going to say, rewind this and listen to everything I just said for point number 1 again. The only thing I'm going to add is actual real data from my own experience, and you can even go look it up online, that it snows in April in Southern Appalachia. My most miserable days on trail were April 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. There was a snowstorm on April 9th that I zeroed out. I got back on trail on the 10th. That was my worst day on trail. Sludging through thigh-high snow, post-holing, where the sun was beginning to hit it. It was slushy. It was that wet, heavy snow. I was wet, cold, miserable. Snowy. There's a new nickname for him. Zoe got snowy and cold. He was having fun in it at first, and then he got cold. So the days following that snowstorm were cold, so everything was refreezing, or the sun was hitting it and it was melting, so it was slushy and wet, and then it rained for like 2 days, like 2 more days after that. So yeah, that stretch of 4 days, I was wet and cold and miserable, and it sucked. And if I had not had winter gear because it was April, I would have froze. I would have had hypothermia. Anyone would have. There were actually a couple of people I talked to on the trail who stayed on the trail during the snowstorm, and one of them actually had to get off trail, go to the ER, and get treated for frostbite. Because he stayed in a shelter during the snowstorm. It was that cold. And this was in the Tennessee, North Carolina stretch, like between Hot Springs and Irwin, when you're going in and out of Tennessee, North Carolina, and you never know which state that you're in. April 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. So that was my personal experience actually on the AT on my thru hike. The year prior to that, in 2021, I had some friends who were planning a backpacking trip the last weekend of April to hike in the Black Mountain Range of North Carolina, which is where the tallest mountains east of the Mississippi are. Last weekend of April for someone's birthday. There was a snowstorm that weekend. I didn't go, some other people did, and they about froze. And they were miserable. I went on a Blue Ridge Parkway trip in my RV the first week of May and the second week of May, immediately following that late season snowstorm in April. And I was in Virginia and North Carolina on the Blue Ridge Parkway for the first 2 weeks of May. And there was a hard frost on the ground in lower elevations. And there was still ice in upper elevations from that snowstorm where the snow was melting and then freezing again overnight. So don't think that because you're starting in April, you don't need winter gear. And again, go back and listen to all my reasons in number 1 as well. All right, so that's 1 and 2. Number 3. I'm really glad I didn't do this. I am going to gain a bunch of weight before I get on trail so that I have cushion for what I'm going to lose on trail. I see this concept being posted and discussed constantly in the Facebook groups and the forums. And I actually even met some people on trail who did that intentionally. Okay, so I do understand somewhat the logic and the theory behind it is, well, I don't really have much weight to lose. And so if I lose weight, then I'm going to be, anemic or, looking anorexic. I'm going to be struggling, I kind of get that. But at the same time, I really don't get that because I will say if you are already someone who's like underweight or you struggle to put weight on and you lose weight very easily, this might not be a bad idea for you. So there's my caveat to that. Those people are very rare. The rest of the world gains weight usually probably pretty easily and doesn't lose it as easily. Now, yes, most people lose weight on trail. I can honestly say that the vast majority of the people who were in the immediate bubble around me or that I've seen talk about their weight loss online, it's not that extreme. Most people are only losing like 10, maybe 15 pounds. Yes, there are people who lost 40, 50 pounds. They probably had 40 or 50 pounds to lose in that instance. The rest of us who are within some sort of a comfortable weight range, maybe we're 10, 15 pounds over where we really want to be, don't go adding another 10 pounds. Because here's what I struggle with in this argument is, you got all these people like thread after thread online and all of the videos talking about ultralight gear and the gram counters and, adding up the ounces and the pounds and, what's my base weight and spending all this money on ultralight equipment to get the weight off of your back. So you just lost 10 pounds in gear and you're going to turn around and put 10 pounds on your body instead. And that might not come off. In fact, you might be the exception to the rule like I was and actually gain weight on trail. And that's not muscle weight. I gained weight on trail. I started about 10 pounds over where I really would have liked to have started. I tried to lose the weight and just didn't before I got on trail. And then I got on trail and I have multiple reasons. I have thyroid issues, I have hormone issues, and I need to be on a plant-based diet because my body doesn't respond well to animal products. So I got on trail and I was going to try to stay as plant-based as possible, but I knew it was going to be hard. And then honestly, by halfway through the trail, I was just eating whatever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. And it was a lot of ice cream and a lot of burgers and pizza and trail magic with hot dogs and like whatever, like stuff I never eat. And it was hard getting off trail, and you know, sugar and carbs and all of that, they're addictive, and it's really hard to get back to a regular diet when you get off trail. So even if you did lose some weight on trail, if you continue eating the way that you did on trail, which a lot of people do, a lot of people talk about how much they struggle with their diet getting back off trail, you're going to end up putting that weight back on again. So I just, back to the, you know, I'm going to gain 10 or 15 pounds before I get on trail. Why are you taking the weight out of your pack and putting it back on your body? That's still going to potentially cause serious injury to your hips, your knees, your ankles, your feet. It's weight that you're carrying, and it's making it harder for you to go uphill. It's more weight on all of your joints on the downhill. And again, it may be something that you don't lose. You cannot get on trail counting on losing that weight. The only weight that you can guarantee losing is out of your pack. So lose that weight and don't intentionally gain weight before you get on trail. It's not good for your heart. It's not good for your body, your joints, your feet, any of it. Just don't do it. Okay? All right. All right. Bad tip number 4. I'm going to have to not get on my high horse on this one. You need to buy XYZ, insert specific brand, make, model of trail runners instead of boots, because boots are heavy and your feet are going to get tired and they don't dry very quickly. All right, so I have 2 parts to this that tick me off and get me on my high horse. And I'm going to start with the first one is, don't ever buy your footwear based on what someone else says works for them. Their feet and their body are not your feet and your body. What works for someone may be the absolute worst thing for you. And footwear is the number 1 cause of injuries on a long distance hike that could potentially ruin your hike and get you off trail, and even cause long-term damage, and cause damage that may require some pretty expensive surgeries or other, Zoe just thumped down, may require some pretty expensive surgeries and other types of treatments to correct, and you may never even be able to get back on trail again. And yes, that could be caused by buying the wrong kind of footwear. So my recommendation is, it doesn't matter if it's trail runners or boots, we'll have that discussion in a second, is you need to go to a good outfitter or potentially even a really good running store in your local community, or drive if you need to. It is worth it to do a gait analysis. Have them check the pronation of your feet, appropriately measure both of your feet. Your feet are not the same. Measure your arches, your width, not just the length. And then the gait analysis is going to tell you if your feet, it's how you strike the ground, front to back as well as side to side. And those people will be able to tell you things like if you need certain types of insoles and what kinds of shoes are going to work best for you. Then you also need to talk about what kind of injuries you've had in the past. Do you have weak ankles? Were you like, for me, I was in gymnastics and I sprained my ankles a lot. So I have weak ankles. So I do need the support of a boot type of, up around my ankle. I didn't even think about the fact that in my running days, I got Achilles tendonitis. It was like over 10 years ago. So when I was planning my thru hike, it never dawned on me to talk about the fact that I had gotten Achilles tendonitis before, and that could lead to plantar fasciitis. And those 2 injuries nearly destroyed my hike. I mean, if you watched my vlog at all, I struggled with it from Virginia to Maine. And I'm 2.5 months right now post thru hike, and I'm just starting to be able to get up in the morning and walk normal and not deal with the plantar fasciitis pain. So you need to take care of your feet, and you need to have someone who knows what they're doing, do all those measurements, do all those analysis, and tell you what kind of shoes are appropriate to help prevent any type of injuries. Now we'll talk about trail runners versus boots. I personally don't get the trail runner craze. You feel the rocks underneath you, which some people like, I don't. They tend to not hold up very well, but people love them. They're far and away what most people through hike in are trail runners. If you want to through hike and trail runners and they are appropriate to your feet, then do so. But don't discount boots because someone says they're heavy and your feet and your legs are going to get tired and they don't dry very quickly, because that's just not true. Now, maybe 20 years ago, that's true. Boots today can be just as light, if not lighter, than the trail runners that so-and-so is telling you need to buy. There are hybrids. The ones that I wore were a hybrid of a trail runner and a boot. They provided more stability around my ankle and more stability at the bottom. They were thicker at the bottom, but they were literally, I held my hiking partner's shoes and my boots, and they were the same weight. And my boots actually dried faster than a lot of people's trail runners. When we were at hostels and we were all drying out our shoes, my boots were dry faster. They did have a layer of Gore-Tex on them, so I think that helped. And I think they were just made well. Mine were La Sportiva, was the brand that I wore. I'm not saying you need to go out and buy La Sportiva hybrid boots. I'm just saying that's what I wore. And that was my personal experience with them. I know that there are plenty of the popular trail runner brands like Hoka and Ultra, Merrell, Solomon, that they make higher like high top versions of their speed runners. I don't know where that came from. Of their trail runners. So that high top version may give you a little bit more ankle support if that's something that you need. So please, please, please stop telling people to go out and buy trail runners instead of boots and to buy XYZ specific brands. Everyone's feet are different and you need to buy what's appropriate to your feet. All right, and number 5, last piece of actual bad advice that I see in here all the time. Saw this on trail more than once. The only first aid that you need is a couple of Band-Aids. Okay? If you want a chance going 2,200 miles through the wilderness over sharp rocks and across rivers and, everything else with a couple of Band-Aids, go for it. Plenty of people do. Plenty of people need more than a couple of Band-Aids when they get hurt. Now, I'm not saying you need to bring an entire first aid kit. I am the girl who, as I've said in many of my other videos, when I go on my day hikes, I'm the 10 essentials girl. I'm prepared. I have my extra layers. I have my emergency stuff. I went and bought one of those first aid kits that you can purchase at like any REI. I took a bunch of the duplicate stuff out, left some Band-Aids, put in a variety of other types of Band-Aids. I would say at minimum, you do need a variety of bandages. I would just bring, you can get the very lightweight ones that roll up of like, I'm not, ace bandage is what I'm trying to say, but you don't need like the big clunky ace bandage. Like there's some very lightweight, like that stick to itself in a roll. I carried that and it's light and it fit into that little pouch that I bought when I took other stuff out and put that into it. Because you can use, oh my gosh, I use that so many different times for a variety of things. And I had so many people borrowing things out of my medicine kit because they didn't bring it. But you gotta, like, I would bring some emergency things, like just a couple of aqua tabs, because yes, your filter is going to work 99% of the time, but there's going to be some sketchy places that you have to get water from. And there was one time on trail, I was very thankful I had my aqua tabs, just saying. I would bring, and yes, that is first aid because you don't want to get giardia. I had a bleed stop, which we used on a friend of mine who had thin blood arteries from his medication and stuff. And so we used the bleed stop on him when he fell and had a pretty bad cut on his arm. Definitely used the bandage. We used the bigger pads with tape. And then like your basic things like some antiseptic, anti-itch cream. Trust me, you're gonna want that come bug season. And then ibuprofen and some sort of like headache specific, like a migraine type of medicine. Beyond that, I mean, you probably are only going to need something after you have a specific injury. Like I had to carry some hydrocortisone cream prescription after I got poison ivy, and some extra like poison ivy wash and gauzes and things like that to wrap around the area. But I was only carrying that for a certain part of the trail while I had poison ivy. But just the people who are like, you know, their medicine kit literally is like an Advil and 2 Band-Aids. What do you do if you're hiking alone and you go tumbling down the rocks like I did and I saw a lot of other people do, and you come up a bloody mess? I mean, 2 Band-Aids isn't going to cut it. So, yeah, you need more than that. All right, that's the end of my worst advice for an AT through hike video. I hope that you've learned something, and please hit like, subscribe, the bell, all that jazz, and I'll see you with my next video. Bye.